The silence in Lily's bedroom felt like a scream. Sarah Chen stood frozen in the doorway, her manicured fingers gripping the brass handle as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. The afternoon sun streamed through the gauze curtains, casting long shadows across the chaos that had once been her daughter's sanctuary. Drawers hung open like gaping mouths, their contents spilled and scattered. The closet door stood ajar, revealing empty hangers swaying gently in the air conditioning's whisper. She had come upstairs to collect Lily's laundry, a mundane, motherly task that now felt like archaeology, digging through the remnants of a life she thought she knew. The red suitcase was gone. So were Lily's favourite jeans, the ones with the small tear at the knee that Sarah had offered to mend a dozen times. The silver jewellery box their grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday sat empty, its velvet compartments holding nothing but dust and broken promises. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped deeper into the room, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. Something was wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. Lily had left for school that morning, with her usual kiss on Sarah's cheek, her backpack slung over one shoulder, complaining about her calculus test. Normal. Everything had been beautifully, perfectly normal. The unmade bed drew her forward like a magnet. The comforter lay twisted, as if Lily had tossed and turned through the night. Sarah reached out to smooth the wrinkled fabric, her fingers trembling as they brushed against something hard beneath the mattress. Paper. Her breath caught as she lifted the corner and pulled out a manila envelope. Thick and promising secrets. Inside, 2 airline tickets to Mexico City stared back at her. Departure, tomorrow morning. One ticket bore her daughter's name in neat computer print. The other read, Diego Morales. The world tilted sideways. Sarah sank onto the bed, the tickets fluttering from her numb fingers like fallen leaves. Diego, the landscaper's son. The quiet boy who had been trimming their hedges and planting their flowers for the past 2 years. The boy who barely spoke English, who kept his eyes downcast when Marcus barked orders about the sprinkler system or the dying rose bushes. But there was more. Sarah's hands moved of their own accord, searching, finding. Lily's diary, usually, hidden beneath a stack of college brochures, lay open on the nightstand as if abandoned in haste. The pink leather cover fell open to pages covered in her daughter's careful script, words that made Sarah's vision blur with tears she hadn't known were coming. Diego understands me in ways Mum and Dad never could. He sees who I really am, not who they want me to be. His grandmother in Guadalajara is expecting us. She's already preparing a room. 3 more days, and we'll be free. Free. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Free from what? From the life she and Marcus had built so carefully. From the opportunities they had sacrificed everything to give. Her. From the love that had shaped every decision they had made for 16 years. The sound of Marcus's Mercedes pulling into the driveway broke through her shock like thunder. Sarah heard the car door slam, his footsteps on the front walk, the jingle of keys at the front door. In moments, he would call out his usual greeting, would ask about her day, would expect the warm kiss and the comfortable domesticity that had been their routine for 2 decades. She clutched the diary to her chest and waited, tears streaming down her face, for her world to end. Marcus Chen had always believed that love was protection, and protection was control. He stood in Lily's bedroom doorway, his briefcase still in his hand, his silk tie loosened but not removed, watching his wife of 20 years fall apart in real time. Sarah sat on their daughter's bed, surrounded by the evidence of betrayal, airline tickets scattered like accusations, diary pages fluttering in the air conditioning's artificial breeze, empty drawers gaping like wounds. Mexico, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She's planning to run away to Mexico with Diego Morales. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Diego Morales, the landscaper's son who had been working on their property for 2 years, who Marcus had specifically chosen because the boy was quiet, respectful, invisible, safe. Or so he had thought. Marcus set down his briefcase with careful precision, his lawyer's mind already cataloguing the situation, searching for solutions, for ways to regain control. But beneath the analytical surface, something much more primitive stirred, a rage so pure and protective it made his vision blur at the edges. 19 years old. The boy was 19 years old, and Lily was barely 16. In Marcus's mind, it wasn't romance, it was predation. He sank into the chair at Lily's desk, the same chair where he had helped her with homework countless nights, where they had planned her future together. Harvard, maybe, or Stanford. Pre-law, following in his footsteps. A life of dignity and success that he had fought so hard to make possible. The memories came flooding back unbidden. His own journey from Taipei to Austin 30 years ago. A scared, graduate student with $50 in his pocket and a head full of dreams. The nights he had worked in restaurant kitchens to pay for law school, his hands raw from scrubbing dishes, his eyes burning from textbook pages, the humiliation of failed English, of professors who couldn't pronounce his name correctly, of classmates who saw him as competition to be eliminated rather than a colleague to be welcomed. All of it, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every small victory had been for Lily, to give her what he had never had: belonging, security, choices. The American dream made manifest in his brilliant, beautiful daughter, who spoke English like poetry and walked through the world with confidence he had never possessed at her age. And now she wanted to throw it all away for a boy whose family lived in the shadows, whose very presence in their country was illegal, whose future was as uncertain as Marcus's own had once been. "Where is she?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. Sarah looked up, mascara streaked down her cheeks. "I don't know. She left for school this morning, but..." She gestured helplessly at the chaos around them. "The tickets are for tomorrow morning, Marcus. Tomorrow." The timeline crystallized in his mind. 24 hours to save his daughter from the biggest mistake of her life. 24 hours to preserve everything he had built, everything he had dreamed for her. Marcus stood and walked to Lily's window, looking down at the immaculate garden below. Even now, in the failing light, he could see Diego's handiwork. The carefully pruned roses, the symmetrical flower beds, the pristine lawn that required twice weekly maintenance. The boy had been in their space for 2 years, had been watching, planning, seducing his daughter right under his nose. The thought made him sick. "We have to find her," he said, his voice steady now, controlled. "We have to bring her home and make her understand that this is impossible." But even as he spoke, the words, Marcus felt something dark and cold settling in his chest, because deep down, in the part of his mind where his father's voice still whispered warnings about protecting what was precious, he knew that talking might not be enough. Love was protection. Protection was control. And sometimes, control required actions that civilized men pretended they would never take. Sarah was crying again, but Marcus no longer heard her. His attention was fixed on the garden below, where tomorrow Diego Morales would come to work, unsuspecting, vulnerable, where this would all be decided, one way or another. Diego Morales had been dreaming of Guadalajara since he was 7 years old. The morning sun beat down on his shoulders as he knelt in the Chen family's garden, his hands deep in the rich soil, transplanting the last of the summer annuals. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the early hour, but he didn't mind. Tomorrow, he would never have to work in another person's garden again. Tomorrow, he and Lily would be on a plane, flying toward a future that belonged to them alone. His grandmother's letters sat folded in his back pocket, the paper worn soft from constant handling. "Mijo, bring her home to us. Let me meet the girl who has captured your heart." Abuela Elena had written the words in her careful script, and Diego could almost hear her voice in the ink, warm and welcoming in a way that the Chen house had never been. He paused in his work to glance up at Lily's bedroom window, hoping to catch a glimpse of her face, but the curtains remained drawn. She would be getting ready for school now, choosing her clothes carefully, braiding her hair the way he loved. Tonight, after her parents went to sleep, she would sneak out to meet him for their final goodbye before the flight. Everything was planned, rehearsed, perfect, almost perfect. Diego's hands stilled in the soil as a shadow fell across the flower bed. He looked up to see Mr. Chen standing at his office window, coffee cup in hand, watching. The older man's face was unreadable, behind the glass, but something in his posture made Diego's stomach clench with unease. Had he been discovered? Did Mr. Chen know about the tickets, about the plans, about the promises he and Lily had made to each other under the August moon? Forcing himself to appear casual, Diego returned to his work, but his movements felt clumsy now, observed. He had always been careful around Lily's father, the successful lawyer who spoke to him only to give instructions, who looked through him as if he were furniture. Diego understood his place in the Chen family's ecosystem. Invisible labor, easily replaced, barely tolerated. But Lily saw him differently. She saw Diego Morales the person, not Diego the gardener's son. She listened when he talked about his dreams of studying engineering, about bringing his family out of the shadows, about building something meaningful with his hands and his mind. She didn't care that his English carried the cadence of his childhood, or that his clothes came from discount stores, or that his future was uncertain in a country that had never quite accepted him as belonging. The note in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest. 3 pages of careful Spanish, words he had written for Lily to carry with them on the journey. In it, he had tried to explain what she meant to him, how she had transformed his world from black and white into vivid color, how loving her had made him brave enough to dream beyond the boundaries others had set for him. Diego finished planting the last marigold and sat back on his heels, surveying his work. The garden looked perfect, symmetrical, vibrant, everything in its designated place. Tomorrow, someone else would tend these flowers. Someone else would water the roses and trim the hedges and make the Chen property look like the suburban paradise it was meant to be. But tonight, he would hold Lily in his arms and tell her about Guadalajara's cathedral bells, about his grandmother's tamales, about the small apartment he had already rented where they could start their life together. Tonight, everything would begin. A cloud passed over the sun, casting the garden in sudden shadow. Diego shivered despite the heat and glanced once more at the office window. Mr. Chen was still there, still watching, his coffee cup forgotten in his hands. Diego gathered his tools and headed for the truck, eager to finish his work and count down the hours until freedom. He did not see Marcus Chen's reflection in the glass, did not notice the way the older man's knuckles had gone white around the ceramic handle. He did not know that he was looking at his garden for the last time. The confrontation exploded at dinner, triggered by something as simple as an empty chair. Sarah had set the table for 3, as she always did, the good china arranged precisely, cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles. 6 o'clock came and went. 6:30. 7. The roast grew cold in its serving dish, while Marcus paced the dining room like a caged animal. His phone pressed to his ear as he called Lily's friends, her teachers, anyone who might know where she had gone. When she finally walked through the front door at 8:15, her school bag slung carelessly over her shoulder, her cheeks flushed from running, Sarah felt relief and terror collide in her chest like opposing storms. "Where have you been?" Marcus's voice was deceptively calm, but Sarah could hear the razor edge beneath the control. Lily shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Library. Working on a project." "Which library?" "The one at school." "The school library closes at 4 o'clock on Wednesdays." The lie hung in the air between them, transparent and desperate. Sarah watched her daughter's face crumble as she realized she had been caught, that whatever carefully constructed story she had prepared was useless now. Marcus walked to the dining room table and picked up the airline tickets, holding them like evidence in a criminal trial. "Mexico City, Lily. Were you planning to tell us, Or were we supposed to find your empty bedroom tomorrow morning and wonder what happened to our daughter? The colour drained from Lily's face, but her chin lifted in defiance, a gesture so reminiscent of Marcus in his courtroom days that Sarah's heart ached. You went through my room. I found these under your mattress while looking for your laundry, Sarah said quietly, along with your diary. You read my diary. The betrayal in Lily's voice was so pure, so wounded that Sarah had to look away. Who is Diego Morales? Marcus's words fell like stones into still water. Lily's composure finally shattered. He's someone who sees me, who loves me for who I am, not who you want me to be. He's 19 years old, and you're 16. So what? You and Mum have a 5-year age difference. We met in college, Lily, as adults, not when one of us was a child. I'm not a child. The words came out as a scream that seemed to surprise even Lily herself. I'm 16 years old, and I know what I want, and what I want is to be with Diego. Sarah stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. Sweetheart, we can discuss this. We can find a way to… There's nothing to discuss. Marcus's voice cut through Sarah's, attempt at mediation like a blade. You are not getting on that plane. You are not throwing your life away for some boy who works in our garden. His name is Diego, and he's not some boy. He's kind and smart, and he has dreams and plans, and he loves me. He's using you, Lily. Can't you see that? You represent everything he wants: citizenship, money, opportunity. You're his ticket to a better life. The accusation hung between them like poison gas. Lily's face went white, then red, then white again. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but each word landed with devastating precision. You don't know him. You've never even tried to know him. You look right through him like he's invisible, because he's Mexican, and his family doesn't have money, and he doesn't fit into your perfect American dream. Marcus stepped forward, his control finally beginning to crack. My perfect American dream is you, Lily. Everything I've done, every sacrifice I've made, has been to ensure you have choices he could never give you. Then let me choose. Not this. Anything but this. The finality in his voice seemed to drain the fight out of Lily all at once. She looked from her father to her mother, searching for an ally, for understanding, for some crack in their united front. Sarah wanted to reach for her, to pull her daughter into her arms and promise that everything would be okay, but she couldn't move. She was trapped between her husband's protective fury and her daughter's desperate love, and there was no safe ground left to stand on. Marcus walked to the kitchen and returned with Lily's cell phone, which he placed on the dining table with deliberate ceremony. You won't be needing this anymore. Dad, you can't. I can, and I will. You are grounded until further notice. School and home. That's it. This is insane. You can't keep me prisoner. I can keep you safe. The words carried such weight, such certainty, that even Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw something in his face that she had never seen before. Something cold and implacable and frightening. Lily must have seen it too, because she took a step backward, her defiance finally giving way to fear. What are you going to do? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He stood in their dining room, surrounded by the trappings of the life he had built. The expensive furniture, the original artwork, the crystal chandelier that caught the light like diamonds, and Sarah realized that he was calculating, planning, deciding just how far he was willing to go to protect what he considered his. I'm going to make sure you never see Diego Morales again, he said finally, his voice soft and terrible in its certainty. Lily ran upstairs, her footsteps echoing through the house like gunshots. Her bedroom door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows, and then there was silence. Sarah and Marcus stood alone in their dining room, the cold roast still untouched on the table, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them like a sword. The morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that Texas summer rarely offered. as if the world had been washed clean overnight and hung out to dry under an impossibly blue sky. Diego arrived at the Chen property at 7:30, just as he had every Tuesday and Friday for the past 2 years. His truck coughed to a stop in the circular driveway, the engine rattling with the particular wheeze that meant he needed to replace the timing belt soon. One more expense he couldn't afford. One more worry that would disappear tomorrow when he and Lily stepped onto that plane. He unloaded his tools with unusual care, arranging them precisely in his wheelbarrow as if they were surgical instruments. The mower, the hedge trimmers, the hand tools he had bought one by one with money saved from this job and a dozen others like it. Tomorrow, his younger brother Miguel would inherit them, along with the responsibility for maintaining the Chen family's small slice of suburban perfection. The garden looked particularly beautiful in the morning light, every plant positioned with the mathematical precision that Mrs. Chen favored. Diego had learned her preferences over the months, the way she liked her roses trimmed just so, the specific arc she wanted for the hibiscus hedge, the exact spacing required between the seasonal flowers. He had become fluent in her unspoken language of botanical control and took pride in exceeding her expectations. Through the kitchen window, he caught a glimpse of Mrs. Chen making coffee, her movements automatic and tired. She looked older than he remembered, her face drawn with worry. Diego wondered if she knew about the tickets, about the plan, about the decision that would tear her family apart. He hoped not. Mrs. Chen had always been kind to him in small ways. Cold water on hot days, a plate of leftover cake when he worked late, a genuine thank you that made him feel human rather than invisible. The front door opened, and Mr. Chen emerged, coffee cup in hand, wearing the kind of casual clothes that probably cost more than Diego's family made in a month. Khakis creased to knife edges, a polo shirt in deep navy that brought out his eyes, leather loafers that had never known honest work. Even on his day off, the man looked like a magazine advertisement for success. Diego. The greeting was curt, businesslike. "Good morning, Mr. Chen." They had never exchanged more than a dozen words. At a time, their conversations limited to instructions about the sprinkler system or complaints about the grass height. Diego preferred it that way. Mr. Chen's attention was never comfortable. It carried weight, judgment, the kind of scrutiny that made Diego hyper-aware of his second-hand clothes and uncertain English. But today felt different. Mr. Chen lingered on the front steps, sipping his coffee with deliberate slowness, his eyes tracking Diego's movements with an intensity that made the younger man's skin crawl. There was something predatory in the surveillance, something that reminded Diego of the way his father's roosters circled each other before a fight. Diego tried to lose himself in the familiar routine of garden maintenance, but he could feel those eyes on him constantly. When he knelt to weed the flower bed beneath Lily's window, he imagined her watching from behind the curtains, maybe even trying to signal him somehow. Tonight, they would meet one last time, in the park, where they had shared their first kiss 6 months ago. Tonight, he would hold her and promise that everything would be worth it. The uncertainty, the fear, the inevitable heartbreak they would cause. The sun climbed higher, and sweat began to bead on Diego's forehead. He was trimming the rose bushes when he noticed the note tucked into their secret hiding place. A loose brick in the garden wall, where they had been leaving messages for months. His heart leaped as he palmed the small piece of paper, but something made him wait to read it. Some primitive instinct warned him to be careful, to be smart. When he finally unfolded the note, his blood turned to ice. "They know. Can't meet tonight. Can't see you anymore. I'm sorry. L." The paper fluttered from his numb fingers. They knew. Somehow Mr. and Mrs. Chen had discovered everything. The relationship, the plans, maybe even the tickets. Diego's mind raced through possibilities, through options, through ways this might not be the disaster it appeared to be. He became aware that Mr. Chen was no longer on the front steps. Turning, Diego saw him approaching across the lawn, moving with the measured pace of a man who had made a decision and was prepared to see it through. "Diego, I need to speak with you. The younger man straightened, his hands still dirty from the garden soil. Yes, sir? Mr. Chen stopped 6 feet away, close enough for conversation, but far enough to maintain the distance that had always existed between them. In his hand, he held something that caught the light, a letter opener, Diego realized. Silver and sharp, with an ornate handle that spoke of old money and family heritage. My daughter will not be running away to Mexico with you. The words landed, like physical blows. Diego's throat constricted, but he managed to speak. Sir, she's 16 years old, a child, and you're taking advantage of her innocence for your own gain. No, sir, I love her. I would never. Love? Mr. Chen's laugh was harsh, bitter. You love what she represents. Citizenship, security, a way out of the shadows where your family lives. The accusation hit Diego like a slap. He thought of all the nights he had lain awake planning their future, imagining not what Lily could give him, but what he could give her. Adventure, passion, a love uncomplicated by expectation and control. He thought of his grandmother's letters, of the small apartment he had rented in Guadalajara, of the dreams they had woven together under summer stars. You don't understand, he said quietly. We love each other. What I understand, Mr. Chen said, stepping closer, the letter opener catching the light, is that you will never see my daughter again. The threat hung in the air between them, sharp, as the blade in the older man's hand. Diego saw madness in those eyes, the kind of protective insanity that transformed civilized men into something primitive and dangerous. He took a step backward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Mr. Chen, please, let's talk about this. Maybe we can… The letter opener moved faster than thought, sliding between Diego's ribs with surgical precision. The young man looked down in shock at the silver handle protruding from his chest, at the spreading bloom of red across his work shirt. His legs gave out, and he sank to his knees in the garden he had tended so carefully, his blood seeping into the soil that had never known violence. Mr. Chen stood over him, his face white with shock at his own actions, the reality of what he had done settling over him like a suffocating blanket. Diego's last thought was of Lily, of the life they would never have, of the grandmother in Guadalajara who would wait forever for a grandson who would never come home. The roses continued to bloom, indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded beneath their thorns. Sarah found them in the garden 20 minutes later, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name and would spend the rest of her life wishing she had ignored. The scene before her seemed impossible, like a painting from a nightmare. Marcus stood motionless beside the rose bushes, his khakis splattered with blood, the antique letter opener, his grandfather's letter opener, the one that had sat on his desk for 20 years, hanging loosely from his right hand. At his feet, Diego Morales lay crumpled among the marigolds, his dark eyes staring sightlessly at the Texas sky. The silence stretched between them like a canyon. Birds still sang in the oak trees. The sprinkler system continued its programmed rotation, sending arcs of water across the lawn in geometric patterns. The world continued to turn, indifferent to the moment when everything changed forever. Marcus? Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. Marcus, what did you do? He turned to look at her, and she saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. 20 years of marriage collapsed into this single moment of recognition, that the man she had, shared a bed with, raised a child with, built a life with, was capable of murder. He was going to take her away, Marcus said, his voice flat and emotionless. He was going to destroy everything we built for her. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees in the grass, her dress absorbing the morning dew. The mundane detail seemed important somehow. She would have to soak the stain in cold water, would have to explain to the dry cleaner why her summer dress was ruined. Then the absurdity of worrying about laundry while looking at a dead body in her garden struck her, and she began to laugh. The sound came out high and hysterical, mixing with sobs until she couldn't tell the difference. Sarah. Marcus dropped the letter opener and moved toward her, his hands outstretched. Sarah. Listen to me. We have to think. We have to be smart about this. Smart? The word came out as a shriek. You killed someone, Marcus. You killed a boy. I protected our daughter. You murdered Diego Morales in our garden. The reality of their situation began to penetrate Marcus's shock-induced calm. He looked around wildly, as if seeing the scene for the first time. The blood soaking into the soil, the body sprawled among the flowers, the evidence of his crime written in crimson across their perfect suburban tableau. We have to call the police. Sarah whispered. No. The word came out sharp and final. No, we can't do that. Marcus, we have to think about Lily. He grabbed her shoulders, his fingers digging into her flesh. Think about what this will do to her. Her father arrested for murder. Her mother complicit. Her future destroyed. Everything we worked for, gone. Sarah stared into his eyes and saw the lawyer in him calculating, planning, searching for ways to turn this catastrophe into something manageable. The man who had built his career on finding solutions to impossible problems was applying that same ruthless logic to murder. What are you saying? I'm saying we protect our family. We protect our daughter's future. We make sure this never comes to light. The suggestion hung between them like a venomous snake. Sarah looked at Diego's body, at the boy who had loved her daughter enough to plan a future with her, who had worked in their garden with such care, who would never see 19. The wrongness of it crashed over her in waves. Not just Marcus's crime, but the even greater crime they were contemplating. We can't, she whispered. We can, and we will. Marcus's voice carried the same certainty it had when he forbade Lily from seeing Diego. For Lily, for our family, for everything we've built. Time seemed to compress and expand simultaneously. Sarah found herself moving as if in a dream, following Marcus's instructions with the mechanical precision of someone in shock. They wrapped Diego's body in the tarp from the storage shed. They carried him to the far corner of the garden, where the earth was soft and the neighbor's fence provided privacy. They dug in silence, their expensive lives reduced to the primitive act of concealing evidence. With each shovelful of dirt, Sarah felt another piece of her soul crumble away. The woman who had baked cookies for school fundraisers, who had volunteered at the library, who had never so much as shoplifted a pack of gum, was burying a body in her backyard. The transformation felt complete and irreversible, as if she had crossed a line drawn in blood and could never find her way back. When it was over, they stood in their garden as the sun climbed toward noon, dirt under their manicured fingernails, sweat and blood on their clothes, the weight of their shared secret settling over them like a shroud. Marcus reached for her hand, but Sarah pulled away. She couldn't bear his touch, couldn't stand the thought of those fingers, the same fingers that had held their daughter as a baby, that had traced her spine in the darkness of their bedroom, covered in Diego's blood. Sarah, he said quietly, we did what we had to do. She looked at him across the chasm that had opened between them. This man who had been her partner, her confidant, her other half. The Marcus she had married was gone, replaced by someone capable of murder and manipulation. Someone who could look at a dead boy and see only a problem to be solved. The silence that stretched between them now was different from the stunned quiet that had followed the stabbing. This was the silence of complicity, of shared guilt, of a marriage transformed by violence into something unrecognizable. Above them, Lily's bedroom window remained closed, the curtains drawn against the day. Their daughter slept on, unaware that the boy she loved lay buried beneath the roses he had planted, unaware that her parents had crossed a line that would poison everything they touched from this moment forward. The sprinklers continued their endless cycle, washing the last traces of blood from the grass, leaving the garden looking exactly as it had before, perfect, pristine, hiding its terrible secret beneath a surface of suburban normalcy. Detective Rosa Gutierrez had been investigating missing persons cases for 8 years. long enough to recognize the difference between someone who chose to disappear and someone who had disappearance chosen for them. Diego Morales belonged to the second category. She sat in her unmarked sedan outside the Chen residence, studying the immaculate facade while Diego's mother wept in the passenger seat. Maria Morales clutched a photograph of her son, his high school graduation picture, cap and gown pristine, smile bright with hope for a future that would never come. "He never miss work," Maria said in careful English, her accent thick with grief. "Never. 2 days now. No Diego. Something bad happened, I know." Rosa had heard variations of this conversation too many times. Young Latino men who vanished without a trace, their families left to navigate a system that viewed their missing sons as statistics rather than tragedies. But something about Diego's disappearance felt different. The boy had been planning something. His brother Miguel had mentioned saved money, secretive phone calls, talk of travel. People planning to disappear usually left more obvious clues. The Chen house sat like a monument to suburban success, its manicured lawn and architectural perfection, declaring the triumph of the American dream. Rosa had researched the family before making this visit. Marcus Chen, immigration attorney, pillar of the community. Sarah Chen, former teacher turned full-time mother. One daughter, 16, honor student. The kind of family that belonged to country clubs and charity boards, that hosted dinner parties and donated to political campaigns. The kind of family that existed in a different universe from the Morales clan, who lived paycheck to paycheck and worried constantly about deportation. But Diego had worked here for 2 years. There had to be some connection, some thread that might lead to answers. Rosa helped Maria from the car and walked with her up the stone pathway to the front door. The garden was spectacular, roses in full bloom, flower beds arranged with mathematical precision, every blade of grass perfectly trimmed. Someone took exceptional care of this property. Sarah Chen answered the door before they knocked, as if she had been watching from the window. She was smaller than Rosa had expected, delicate in the way of women who had never known physical hardship, but her eyes held a weariness that seemed disproportionate to the early hour. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Detective Gutierrez, and this is Maria Morales. We're looking for her son Diego. I understand he works on your property." Something flickered across Sarah's face. Surprise, fear, or perhaps just the natural anxiety of someone unaccustomed to police visits. "Diego? Yes, he maintains our garden, but I haven't seen him this week." "When did you last see him?" Sarah's hands twisted in the fabric of her dress. "Tuesday, I think. His usual day. He was working in the roses." "Did he seem upset about anything? Worried? Different in any way?" "I don't really interact with him much. My husband handles the landscaping arrangements." Rosa made notes, watching Sarah's body language. The woman was nervous, but that could mean anything. Some people were naturally uncomfortable around police. "Is your husband available?" "He's at the office. I can give you his number." Maria stepped forward, clutching Diego's photograph. "Please, Mrs. Chen. You see my Diego? You know where he go?" Sarah looked at the photograph, and Rosa saw something crumble in her expression. Pain, perhaps, or guilt. "I'm sorry. I wish I could help you." The words carried genuine emotion, but Rosa's instincts prickled. Something was wrong with this picture. Sarah Chen was hiding something, not necessarily about Diego's disappearance, but something significant enough to make her hands shake and her voice catch. Rosa left her card and promised to be in touch. As they walked back to the car, she found herself studying the garden again. Perfect. Too perfect. The kind of perfection that required constant maintenance, constant attention to detail, the kind of perfection that might hide imperfections beneath its flawless surface. Back at the station, Rosa pulled Diego's file and spread the contents across her desk. High school graduate. No criminal record. Worked multiple jobs to support his family. Planning to attend community college in the fall. Not the profile of someone who would simply vanish without a word. Her phone buzzed with a text from her partner. Missing person report just came in. Lily Chen, 16, hasn't been home in 3 days. Same address you visited today. Rosa stared at the message, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Diego Morales and Lily Chen. The landscaper's son and the lawyer's daughter. 3 days ago, around the same time Diego disappeared. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door. In her experience, when two people from different worlds went missing simultaneously, it usually meant one of two things. They had run away together, or someone had made sure they could never run away at all. The Chen house looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but now Rosa saw it with different eyes. Not a monument to success, but a fortress designed to keep the world at bay. The perfect garden wasn't just beautiful. It was controlled, managed, shaped by someone who couldn't tolerate anything out of place. Someone who might go to extreme lengths to maintain that control. Rosa parked across the street and settled in to wait. In her experience, families with secrets couldn't maintain perfect facades indefinitely. Sooner or later, the cracks would show, and when they did, she would be ready. The marriage began to die by degrees, poisoned from within by the weight of their shared secret. Sarah couldn't sleep. Every night she lay rigid beside Marcus, listening to his steady breathing and wondering how he could rest so peacefully with Diego's blood on his hands. When she finally did drift off, her dreams were haunted by the sound of shovels in dirt, by the sight of unseeing eyes staring at the Texas sky, by the terrible weight of the tarp-wrapped body they had carried between them like a grotesque wedding. March. 3 weeks had passed since the murder. 3 weeks of maintaining the facade of normalcy while their foundation crumbled. Sarah went through the motions of her life: grocery shopping, book club meetings, volunteer work at the literacy center. But everything felt hollow, performative. She was an actress playing the role of Sarah Chen, but the real Sarah had died. In the garden alongside Diego, Marcus, by contrast, seemed energized by their crime. He threw himself into his legal practice with renewed vigor, taking on high-profile immigration cases, appearing on local news programs to discuss border policy. Sarah watched him on the evening news and saw a stranger, confident, articulate, passionate about protecting families from separation and deportation. The irony made her physically ill. "How can you do this?" she asked him one evening as he prepared talking points for another television appearance. "How can you champion immigrant families when we killed—" "Don't." His voice cut through her words like a blade. "Don't say it. Don't think it. What happened was necessary to protect our family. Diego had a family too." Marcus looked up from his notes, his expression cold. "Diego made a choice when he decided to seduce our 16-year-old daughter. Actions have consequences." The clinical way he spoke about murder chilled Sarah to the bone. This wasn't the man she had married, the gentle father who had read bedtime stories and coached soccer teams and cried during Disney movies. This was someone else entirely, someone capable of justifying anything in the name of protection. Lily remained under house arrest, though Marcus had stopped calling it that. Now it was focusing on her future and avoiding distractions. Their daughter moved through the house like a ghost, pale and hollow-eyed, asking questions that neither parent could answer. "Have you heard from Diego?" she asked Sarah one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's hands stilled on the dishes she was washing. "No, sweetheart. Why would I hear from Diego? He was supposed to text me. We had plans." Lily's voice broke on the last word. "Something's wrong. I know something's wrong." The anguish in her daughter's voice nearly broke Sarah's resolve. She wanted to pull Lily into her arms, to confess everything, to somehow make this right. But the weight of complicity held her silent. She was no longer just Marcus's victim. She was his accomplice, bound to him by blood and dirt and the terrible arithmetic of murder. Detective Gutierrez had returned twice, asking more questions, studying their responses with the patient intensity of a hunter. Sarah found herself unable to meet the woman's eyes. terrified that her guilt was written across her face in letters too large to miss. "Any word from your daughter?" the detective had asked during her last visit. "She's been staying with friends," Marcus had replied smoothly. "Teenage drama. You know how it is." But Rosa Gutierrez's expression suggested she knew exactly how it was, and none of it matched what she was being told. The garden had become Sarah's obsession and her torment. She spent hours tending the roses, watering the flower beds, maintaining the perfection that hid their crime. Every time she knelt in the soil, she imagined Diego beneath her hands, his body feeding the roots of plants he had cultivated with such care. The roses were blooming more vibrantly than ever before. "You need to stop," Marcus told her one evening, finding her in the garden at dusk, her knees dirty and her hands bleeding from thorns. "People will notice if you're out here constantly." "Let them notice." Sarah's voice was flat, emotionless. "Let them wonder why the roses are so beautiful this year." Marcus grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Pull yourself together. For Lily's sake, if not for ours." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing of the man she had once loved. "Don't touch me. Sarah, don't touch me." She wrenched her arm free, dirt from her hands smearing across his expensive shirt. "I can't bear it. I can't bear the thought of your hands on me." The rejection hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, his carefully maintained control cracked, and she saw the fear beneath his arrogance. He was losing everything: his wife, his daughter, the perfect life he had killed to protect. "We're in this together," he said quietly. "Like it or not, we're bound by what we did." "No," Sarah whispered. "We're bound by what you did. I just helped you bury the body." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't true. She had made choices that night in the garden. She had chosen complicity over conscience, family over justice. Diego's blood might not stain her hands, but his death would stain her soul forever. Above them, Lily's bedroom light flickered on. Their daughter appeared at the window, looking down at her parents with an expression Sarah couldn't read. Suspicion, fear, understanding. Sarah waved, trying to force normalcy into the gesture, but Lily didn't wave back. She stood silhouetted against the yellow light, watching them with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle with too many missing pieces. After a long moment, she stepped away from the window and pulled the curtains closed. The garden fell into darkness, hiding its secrets beneath a blanket of suburban quiet. The ground-penetrating radar revealed Diego's grave on a Thursday morning in October, 3 months after his murder and 2 weeks after Lily Chen had finally told Detective Gutierrez everything she knew. Rosa stood at the edge of the Chen property, watching the forensics team work, their equipment painting electronic images of what lay beneath the perfect garden. The readings were unmistakable: a rectangular disturbance in the soil, approximately 6 feet long and 3 feet deep, located directly beneath the prize-winning rose bushes that had been the envy of the neighborhood. "Got him," murmured the technician, adjusting his equipment. "Body's been there a while. Probably 3 to 4 months, based on the soil settlement patterns." The timing matched Diego's disappearance perfectly. Rosa felt the familiar satisfaction of pieces clicking into place, tempered by sadness for the family who would finally have answers, but would never have their son back. Sarah Chen watched the proceedings from her kitchen window, her face pale as parchment. She had aged dramatically over the summer, her blonde hair showing dark roots, her carefully maintained appearance giving way to something haunted and worn. When Rosa had shown up with the search warrant that morning, Sarah had simply nodded and stepped aside, as if she had been expecting this moment for months. Marcus Chen, by contrast, had exploded into threats and legal objections, demanding to see warrants, invoking his rights, calling colleagues to protest this harassment of an upstanding family. But Rosa had weathered such storms before. Guilty people often hid behind bluster and legal technicalities. Innocent people usually just looked confused. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Lily Chen, now 17 and no longer, under her parents' control, had appeared at the police station 2 weeks earlier with a story that changed everything. "I think my parents killed Diego," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think they killed him to stop us from being together." The accusation had hung in the interview room like smoke. Rosa had handled hundreds of cases involving family secrets, but few had involved children accusing their own parents of murder. Lily's story had been fragmented, built on suspicion and circumstantial evidence rather than direct knowledge, but the details had painted a compelling picture. Diego's sudden disappearance coinciding with her parents' discovery of their relationship, the change in her father's behavior, the cold calculation, the way he spoke about Diego as if he were already past tense, her mother's breakdown, the sleepless nights, the obsessive gardening, the way they both refused to discuss Diego's disappearance, dismissing it as teenage drama when Lily begged for information. "They buried him in the garden," Lily had said with devastating certainty. "I know they did. Mum spends hours out there now, taking care of plants Diego used to tend. She talks to them sometimes, like she's apologizing." Now, watching the excavation begin, Rosa reflected on the twisted psychology of murder within families. Marcus Chen had killed to protect his daughter, but his crime had destroyed her anyway. Lily would spend the rest of her life knowing that her parents had murdered the boy she loved, that their desire to control her future had led to devastating consequences for everyone involved. The first bones emerged just after noon. The forensics photographer documented everything methodically: the position of the skeleton, the remnants of clothing, the tarp that had served as Diego's shroud. Rosa had seen dozens of crime scenes, but there was something particularly tragic about this one. The careful burial, the preservation of the garden above, the way someone had planted roses over the grave as if trying to create beauty from horror. "Detective!" Sarah Chen appeared at Rosa's shoulder, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the autumn wind. "I need to tell you something." Rosa turned to study the older woman's face. The facade had finally cracked completely, leaving nothing but exhaustion and guilt. "Mrs. Chen, I should advise you of your rights. I know my rights." Sarah's voice was steady now, carrying the weight of a decision made long ago. "I want to confess." They sat in interview room B, the same sterile space where Rosa had heard Lily's accusations 2 weeks earlier. Sarah looked smaller here, diminished by the fluorescent lights and beige walls. Her hands shook as she reached for the paper cup of water Rosa had provided. "Marcus killed him," she said without preamble. "He stabbed Diego with his grandfather's letter opener while the boy was working in our garden. I found them there together, Diego on the ground, Marcus standing over him with blood on his hands." The words came out in a rush, as if Sarah had been holding them back for so long that they had built up pressure behind her lips. Rosa listened without interruption, letting the confession unfold naturally. "I should have called the police immediately. I should have done the right thing. But Marcus convinced me that we had to protect our family, had to think about Lily's future. He said if he went to prison for murder, it would destroy everything we had built for her." "So you helped him dispose of the body?" Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We wrapped Diego in a tarp and buried him in the garden. Marcus chose the spot beneath the roses because the soil was softer there, easier to dig. And because—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "Because what, Mrs. Chen? Because Diego had planted those roses himself. Marcus thought it was poetic justice." The callousness of the detail made Rosa's stomach turn. To murder a young man and then bury him beneath flowers he had planted with his own hands suggested a level of cruelty that went beyond protective instinct, into something much darker. "Mrs. Chen, why are you confessing now?" Sarah looked up, her eyes red with grief. "Because I can't live with it anymore. Because every day I see what we've done to Lily, how we've destroyed her ability to trust or love. Because Diego deserves justice, and his family deserves to know what happened to their son." She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue Rosa had provided. "And because Marcus is planning to blame me for everything." The accusation hung between them, like a challenge, Rosa leaned forward, studying Sarah's expression. "What do you mean?"